Welcome to Circle Live. Today we're going to be talking to New York Times bestselling author, illustrator, and host of the podcast Creative Pep Talk, Andy J. Pizza. We'll be talking about AI music, the power of a guilty pleasure, and why you should be obsessed with being a beginner. Andy, so great to have you on Circle Live.
I'm very, very happy to be here.
We're going to start with this. Our recent industry report showed that people, specifically Circle partners, are talking and thinking a lot about AI. Not a surprise, right? On a recent episode of your podcast, though, you had a specific angle, which was hope in an AI-crazed world. I'm curious, is there something in that podcast episode that you didn't get to cover?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of thoughts on AI, and my only reservation is that there's just so many thoughts being shared about it that it's so chaotic. And a lot of those thoughts end up becoming very divisive and very us versus them sort of thing. And I try not to make every episode about AI. So I've restrained myself a bit. However, it is something, of course, that concerns me, something I think about a lot. And there's a few threads that do make me feel hopeful. One of them is this idea that, we're watching music, record labels create AI musicians, and people are freaking out about it. I think kind of rightfully so. It's not my jam. I'm not into it. I think there's a lot of critiques that need to be made. And I'm not super pumped about listening to AI music, honestly. But the thing that strikes me as sort of missing from the conversation is that we're watching labels, real people labels with AI musicians, and the musicians aren't thinking about how much the labels have at stake, because the AI is actually really good at administration. It's really good at strategy. It's really good at a lot of the business around creativity. And I don't see, and I kind of think rightfully so, but I don't see musicians and artists thinking, hey, if we get forced out, it's not as if we couldn't replace the other side. And that the general public is probably more interested in a real musician with an AI label than they are the reverse. Because artists value humans and humanity so much, I'm not rushing to replace humans. But I am interested in the ways in which AI could potentially arm creators in a way that they never have been throughout history.
I totally agree that the AI as a support instead of replacing humans is, I think, how we kind of rectify and reconcile with what this new world is without necessarily falling behind. I'm curious, if you kind of have ever had that feeling of falling behind as AI continues to move forward.
I think as we're watching this technology rapidly advance, especially in terms of, I remember 10 years ago talking about, AI automation is coming, all the things that can be automated will be automated. I didn't know anything about AI. At that point, I had no idea that it was going to come so hard at the arts. I had no idea that generative AI was even going to be possible. I didn't see any of that coming. So of course, as all that started to rear its head, I felt concerned about my job, and I'm an illustrator and all of these sorts of things. Yes, I have fear. I don't want to minimize that, but I see some real hope and some really interesting things happening. Maybe we'll realize something that's always been true, which is the mistakes and the humanity is what attracts us to art. I loved this quote from David Byrne because I always get flack from people around me that are like, everything you like sounds bad. Everything, all the singers you like can't sing. What is that? And David Byrne said, the better you sing, the harder it is for me to believe you. And that's exactly how I feel, because when someone is pitch perfect, I'm thinking they are not locked into the meaning of this song. They are not feeling it. They are thinking about, I better hit it A, I better hit it, whatever the notes are. I'm not a musician, but that's what I feel like they're thinking when it's just pitch perfect. And so I almost feel like this movement may open up a conversation that the mainstream, I don't feel like has ever really had. I think a lot about how, but a lot of artists are familiar with it. A lot of artists are into the lo-fi stuff, the human stuff, the mistakes, the stuff that doesn't make sense consciously, but maybe hits unconsciously. All of that, I'm thinking, as we get inundated with everything being perfect,
Yeah.
we might start to be more open to, wait a second, maybe that's not what art is about. So when I talk about, yes, of course, I've been afraid. There's fear, and I think even the way that people have bought illustration or clients have commissioned over the past couple of years has been affected by the idea that maybe this is going to be replaceable. So I've felt some of that too. But ultimately, the thing I'm most happy about is that in 2017, 2018, I really started getting obsessed with learning how to paint. And every book that I've made since then has become increasingly less digital. To the last book, the book that's coming out in July, Mysterious Things, is the paintings look almost exactly like what's printed. And so to me, it's like I feel less scared and more grateful that I have already been on a trajectory to go more and more human, more imperfect, and that I think that there's going to be a hunger for that. So I always find I get a lot more insight if I look at it from a different point of view. So I'm a big comedy fan. I'm a big music fan. So everything I think about kind of goes through those lenses. And one of the things that really inspires me about the musicians that I love is that they aren't obsessed with being masters, almost the opposite. They're obsessed with being beginners. And so we had this narrative that was like really dominating the conversation around artistry over the past, I don't know, decade or so about the 10,000 hours rule and all that kind of thing. And it just struck me as interesting. It struck me as I'm sure there's some truth to that. However, why is it that Joanna Newsom moves away from the harp after 3 albums, even though that's her instrument? Why does she want to do a piano album? I've read interesting research around the better you get at an instrument, the harder it is for you to be creative. And so I think for me, it looks like, yeah, in 2018, I honestly I wasn't like, I've never been a hyper realist. I don't have those kind of chops, but I got too good at drawing digitally to the degree, not in which anybody else would be like, that's too good, but it was too good for my taste. It was too clean. It was too perfect. I didn't like in digital that, I still feel this way, it's really difficult to make a mistake when you're drawing digitally that looks good, that looks like a happy accident. It almost always looks wrong. Whereas when you're painting, the opposite is true. And so for me, getting out of my own way looks like, oh, I've kind of become too knowledgeable about this to where I'm too in control. And I need to change something so that I can be less in control.
I know on the podcast you talk a lot about taste and point of view. I'm curious what you think is the difference between the two of this.
Taste to me is very much about, it's a mixture of your acquired taste, things that you've kind of learned to appreciate, learn what's good or quote unquote good about them, even though you didn't get it the first time you put it on your palate. And guilty pleasures. And guilty pleasures, more than anything, are the most interesting to me because they tell you something about what your sensitivity is. So you could think about your tongue with its taste buds, but in a metaphorical sense. So if you have an ear for music, you have a tongue for food, you have an eye for pictures, whatever, all of them have sort of taste buds and they're wildly varying. So like with real taste buds, you have like, some people have hundreds of taste buds. Some people have thousands, and those people are called super tasters. And so whatever your area of expertise, whatever your medium is, you're probably a super taster in that, which means you have a high sensitivity to it. So for me, when I'm thinking about taste, I'm really thinking about your intuitive sensitivity. It's like how you react to something, both something that other people made, but also to what you're making. So I talked to Lulu Miller, who was a co-host of Radiolab. She's been on my show a couple times. And she said, like, as she's going through the edit of an episode, she's going to play it back and just like listen to her body. And that is the taste buds. That's like, what happened? Oh, that almost made me cry. What if I move that song half a centimeter this way and then it hits right after I said it instead of right before? Like, that's the taste. Point of view, I think it goes a little bit into whether you liked it or whether you didn't like it. I think it's part of like, there's a like meaningful moment where you go from being just a fan to then being an artist. And that comes from a critical place, perhaps. It comes from a place of you're consuming your favorite art and all of a sudden you wish they made a different decision. For me, creativity is about doing unique things, but often it's not about trying at all. It's just, how did you see it? And so even as I go through my like everyday life, one way that I try to cultivate that is like when I go to the dentist, my nature is to try to think of what does a normal person say in this scenario? I'm going to say all the normal responses because I don't want to, be not belong, which is the exact opposite impulse of being an artist, like trying to stand out. And so as I go through a dentist appointment, I try to somewhat verbalize my point of view. So if he moves the crane, the little thing, it kind of looks like this, the x-ray thing, and it makes like a Chewbacca sound, I want to say that. Like, oh, that sounded like Chewbacca. Just because your point of view, how you're hearing it, how you're seeing it, that's as much about what your creative work is as the ideas that you come up with that are novel.
Yeah, so we were talking about all these different lanes that you're in. That's definitely something that I think a lot of the web designers that we talk to can connect to. In fact, there is one of the people in our community, Puno, who calls that slashies. She calls them, you're like a slashie. You've got all these different things. What I want to know is, in your career, is that something that you set out to do, to just be this multifaceted, or did you start out with one thing and it developed into all these different things by necessity?
So when I was a kid, I was doing fake Saturday Night Live videos, and I had a talk boy from Home Alone, and I was making my own radio show, and I was drawing Dragon Ball Z characters, and I was doing all kinds of different creative things, as most kids do. Most kids are just doing lots of different creative, fun things. And then as you get older, they're like, hey, you got to figure out one thing. You've got to like limit yourself. And I thought, okay, I'll choose illustration. There was some interesting things happening at the time, and I felt a little bit stronger in that area. So I doubled down, went to school for graphic design and illustration. And then 5, 6, 7 years out of college, I'm trying to make this thing work. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, you can't just be an illustrator. You need to have a podcast. You're going to have videos. You're going to have to do all this stuff. And initially, I think like a lot of people, my response to that was like, no, I just want to be an illustrator. Come on, can't I just draw? And then I realized like, oh, what is a podcast other than a fake radio show on your talk boy? What is make Saturday Night Live skits rather than just making YouTube videos and reels and all that? And so I think for me, there's definitely a part of me that resists it sometimes, doing all these different things, the need to do all that to make a creative practice work. However, I have to tap back into the reason I wanted to pursue a creative endeavor was not because it was stable, but almost the opposite, is that it was completely unpredictable. It was completely novel. It was always different. I always had to show up with something else. Now, I don't like that every day. Yes, there are some Mondays where I'm like pissed because I'm like, why is this so different than it was 3 weeks ago? Yes, I do feel that too. But it's helpful for me to remember that it was once upon a time very difficult and disheartening to have to choose a lane. I definitely feel like I'm still learning, but I have started to realize that if I'm having a full body reaction to that opportunity in a negative way, that I need to pause. I need to slow things down. Sometimes that looks like saying, hey, I need a week to think about this. And if that's non-negotiable, then I am out. If I can't slow it down, if I'm feeling that way, I know I need to slow it down. And so that's one aspect of it. One thing you just said about web design, it just got me thinking I don't even know why exactly, but I want to just add this little bit. Sorry, I'm like commandeering the
Go,
That's why we're here.
you have the mic. Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just something that came to mind where you were talking about, because it was mainly, I guess, taking the slashy thing and then going through the lens of web design. I was imagining, I started to connect the dots there because I'm putting myself in those people's shoes. One thing that I think is an example of this, even if you're not going to create a podcast that opens up a whole other arm of your business, or you're not going to become I'm not famous, but a famous YouTuber, a famous real person on TikTok, whatever, even if you're not going to do that. One way in which I think you are able to diversify and make it interesting and make it what you want it to be is create a niche by not doing web design differently, but letting web design be your niche in a different industry. So one of the things that I've done and I've seen other people do is instead of just like, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm in the web design industry and I'm competing against all these people. And now I'm competing against robots. And it's just so overwhelming. Like, how am I going to stand out? How am I going to create a niche? How am I going to compete with all of that? And instead, what it could look like is like, what are you really interested in, like psychology? Are you really interested in like birds? What are you interested in? And then could you go, your niche could be building websites for that community. So could you pour into creatively a hobby or a side project or an investment in, I'm going to the bird conference. I don't know if they have conferences, but I bet they do. Everyone's got conferences. Go to, they'll be at the hotel at the Hyatt and you'll go there and they'll bring birds in. It'll be amazing. And you'll be the only website designer there.
Yeah.
And every person won't think, are they the best? No, you're the only one they know. So anyway, sorry for commandeering the thing, but I just wanted to connect those two pieces.
That was a beautiful commandeer. Thank you.
Thanks.
We both know so many people in our community who did not start out as web designers. They started out as a therapist or a neurobiologist or a lawyer. They've started out in those fields and then decided they were burnt out in those fields. They knew a little bit of web design. They came to Squarespace. And now they're designing websites for, guess what, therapists or neurobiologists or lawyers or whatever. I mean, in those areas, you have some specific examples, perhaps.
I just have one that seemed relevant.
Yeah.
There is one circle member I know who only makes websites for pizza restaurants. And Andy's last name is Pizza,
perfect.
so it seemed relevant.
That's awesome. That's so funny.
Sorry to interrupt.
Your actual last name is Pizza, right?
No.
Oh, it's not. Okay. All right. Because our producer has someone with that actual last name. We were like, it could be.
We were like, oh my
God. It is a real
related.
name. Yeah. It is a real name, but I'm a complete phony in that way. Not a phony in the way that I have an unhealthy relationship with pizza. So when I go to school visits, I often start by asking the kids, I say, my name's Andy J. Pizza. Raise your hand if you think that's my real name. And then raise your hand if you think I love pizza so much that I decided to marry it and take its name.
That's so good.
But just to your point that, I mean, if you wanted to compete with a pizza web designer, I'm sure that you automatically have that brand on lockdown, right? But I think that's just exactly what you're talking about, is that like be the best with your skills in the class, and you will find so many opportunities that way. How have you found this in your own career? Like, how have you been able to niche down? What connections have you been able to make that way?
A handful of years ago, I started to invest more. I established this podcast, and it became a bigger thing than just a thing in my industry, in illustration and design. It started to kind of bleed out into all kinds of different worlds. And so I started to take it more seriously, started to think of myself a little bit more like a podcaster, which is kind of embarrassing. Sometimes when I'm in public and I'm with my kids, especially my teenagers, and they're annoying me, I will start talking about my podcast just to embarrass them. Like if we're at the bookshop, I'm like, hey, maybe I should get this guy on my podcast. I'm like, Dad, don't talk about your podcast. Anyway, so I started thinking more of myself as a podcaster and an illustrator, and I started to go to the podcasting conferences. And one of the things that's interesting is when I go to the illustration conference, everyone there is drawing during the talks because it's how we cope. It's how we have learned to survive. It's just the way we are. But when I go to the podcast conference and I'm drawing, I'm the only one there drawing. And so I realized that I'm like, oh, nobody else is drawing. I'm going to live draw this conference like they paid me to do it. And I'm going to share it on Instagram and tag them on all the posts and just kind of like live share this whole thing. And then guess what? The next year they hired me to come do it and they paid me to do it. I'm pretty sure they weren't like, is Andy the best illustrator for the job? No, they were just like, Andy's an illustrator. We know that guy. Let's throw him some stuff. And that's been really fruitful.
I think that makes sense, and that checks out with the conversation around AI, that people want to work with people, and they want to work with people that they trust. And one of the things that people can really trust is somebody whose taste and point of view that they are familiar with and that they like.
Yeah, totally. And actually, I just want to add something, not to commandeer, but I'll just add a little bit there where I actually think trust is a much bigger part of the equation than most creative people realize. And this is something I think about a lot. When you think about your relationship to a customer, often we think of that as kind of a two-part transaction. And we really focus our energy on these two things, like getting discovered, being on their radar, and then making the sale. That's really where we focus. A lot of us are showing up on social media, trying a million different experiments because we think if we got discovered, everything else would be fixed. Or we try to figure out like, what is the pricing point? How do I make the sale? What is the product? All that. We put so much energy into those two things. And if anything, if my creative journey has taught me anything, it's taught me that there's a middle piece to those, which is the trust factor. There's discovery, then building trust, deep trust, and then making the sale. The trust is the human connection and the way that you can show them that you are a full person. So for me, that has looked like my podcast, which ended up being this like really big cornerstone to my career. It doesn't often make the most money. It's not the most practical. It's a lot of work. But the thing that it does is it has made me a three-dimensional human. And so when people think of this client job or that speaking opportunity, I think a lot of times I come up because I'm a person in their mind that's fully formed.
Before we go, Andy, you are known as the creative pep talk guy. I want you to give a creative pep talk to any of the web designers or creatives who might be watching this.
So I feel your pain. I feel the fear. I get that this is kind of a weird time, but there's one thing that has made me feel hope that seems kind of silly. Like I can't even grasp fully why it fills me up so much, but it's this band Geese. So if you haven't heard of Geese, the frontman Cameron Winter, he released a solo project last year and they just released a new album and they played Saturday Night Live. And if you need any convincing that we are looking for human touch and imperfection and human connection, look to the band Geese. Look to Cameron Winter's sold out show at Carnegie Hall. This thing is chaotic. It's a mess. And it is above all things human. And people are showing up in droves for that. And it doesn't matter if you like it or don't like it. For me, it's not really about that. It's just witnessing that we care about this. We're always going to care about this. We might care about it more now than we ever have. And so that is the kind of thing that I keep searching for. Where is it in our daily lives, in our culture, in the stuff we consume, that we are seeing human connection is paramount in all things creativity?
Look for the messiness, look for the imperfections, look for the humanity in things. Andy, these are really wise things that you've said, and I just want to thank you for bringing this raw humanity to us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.